This is the Canadian Taxpayers podcast, where we're dedicated to lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government. I'm Chris Sims. I'm the newly minted Alberta director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Still wearing my BC hat a little crooked, and I'm here with Franco Terrazzano, my friend and colleague. He's holding down the fort for us in Ottawa. He's the federal director. So, Franco, we had some fun last week. Most of us across Canada had press conferences highlighting the true cost of the carbon tax just in time for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's rebate. So what gives? Why were we the party poopers here? Why is it actually costing us more than we're getting back in rebates?
Well, it turns out that the Trudeau government isn't exactly being honest with us Canadians. I know you're surprised, shocker. And that's because the Trudeau government is claiming that families are going to be better off with its carbon tax and rebates. It's claiming that after the rebates, families will be made better off. But of course, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, which is the government's own independent watchdog, is saying that the Trudeau government is using magic math. So this year, the average household in one of the provinces that are paying the Trudeau carbon tax, it'll cost them hundreds of dollars, even with the rebate. So let me just kind of break it down by province here. So the average family in Ontario, you're going to pay an extra $360 this year because of the carbon tax, even after the rebates. If you're in Manitoba, the average family, the carbon tax is going to cost you $299. Saskatchewan, that's $390. And in your neck of the woods, Chris, in Alberta, the carbon tax is going to cost that average household $671 this year, even after those rebates.
That is a massive amount of money. Even with inflation, if you're doing the math, that is two massive truckloads of groceries for a family of four here in Alberta. But unfortunately, seems to go along with the theme of Albertans getting kicked harder. Now, we hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I was looking further at that report and it ain't going to get better. It's going to get worse. How did he figure that out, and how much worse is it going to get?
Well, that's putting it mildly. And it's going to get worse because Trudeau is going to keep cranking up his carbon tax all the way to nearly 40 cents per liter of gas by 2030. Okay, so here's what that means to you in the grand scheme of things. It means that from now all the way through 2030, the carbon tax is going to cost your average household anywhere from $6,400 all the way up to $13,000, even after accounting for the rebates, depending on what province you live in. And look, here's the message that we've been delivering. We delivered it during our press conferences. Here's the key message. It is so tone deaf for Trudeau to keep raising the carbon tax when Canadians are already struggling to afford the price of fuel right now.
Yeah, it really is. I've been observing politics my entire life. I actually can't remember the last time I've seen politicians, particularly those in power in Ottawa, this out of touch. The attitude that they give back is basically, well, let them just drive Teslas. It's unbelievable. Average people cannot afford $2 a liter gasoline at the best of times. The idea that they're just going to crank those thumb screws in tighter now and not give a darn about what voters think is crazy. It gets even crazier though, because my old job back at BC, we've been paying the second carbon tax now for years, and it just makes life unaffordable when it comes to prices of the pumps. And now it turns out this calculation from the PBO isn't even including the second carbon tax that's going to come in federally soon.
Yeah, that's right. The PBO's numbers don't include the second carbon tax. And, you know, the government just released its updated impact assessment of the second carbon tax. So let me break those numbers down for you. So here's what the second carbon tax is. It's buried within fuel regulations, and they're going to require producers to reduce the carbon content of their fuels. And if companies can't meet the Trudeau government's requirements, then those companies are going to have to pay the Trudeau government's second carbon tax. But here's the thing. The government's own analysis shows that those costs are going to be passed on to the consumer. The government's own numbers show that the second carbon tax could increase the price of gasoline by up to 13 cents per liter by 2030. But Chris, as you know, that's likely a low ball estimate because the second carbon tax in British Columbia consistently costs more than 15 cents per liter of gas. And here's the thing. There are no rebates with the second carbon tax. So at least with the first carbon tax, you might get some of your money back. Obviously not all of it, but you might get some. No rebates with the second carbon tax. And One more thing that I want to add. We have to stop pretending that these high gas prices are just an accident. They're not. They're precisely what the Trudeau Liberals want. So if you look at the government's own analysis of the second carbon tax, it makes it very clear who these high gas prices are going to hurt the most. They're going to hurt low and middle income Canadians. They're going to hurt the Canadians who are already struggling with energy poverty, the single mothers, the seniors who are living on fixed income. So Chris, it's so mind-boggling to say this, but by 2030, we could be paying more than 50 cents per liter just in carbon taxes.
It's a huge disconnect to, they seem to have this cavalier attitude that you can just opt out of, oh, well, even I was so surprised to hear the outgoing now Premier of British Columbia, John Horgan, who has worked for a living before. That guy used to wait tables at the Keg. He was raised by a single mom. He was not born into a big old inheritance. And his attitude was, well, take the bus. That is shocking coming from a guy who was largely elected within his party from blue collar voters within the NDP, the pipe fitters and the steel workers, folks like that. There is a growing disconnect here. But when it comes to environmentalism, what about the argument that, nobody can afford to drive to work or to head to the grocery store anymore, much less a family car trip this summer. But what about the environment? How do we save the planet if we're not paying through the nose with carbon taxes?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because we hear that all the time. And here's the message that we say. Well, look, the carbon tax is not a low cost environmental plan. The carbon tax is a high cost tax plan. I mean, you know this better than anyone else, Chris, but British Columbia has had the highest carbon tax. I should say the highest carbon tax is for years now, and emissions continue to go up. If you look at the data from the Trudeau government, from the first year of the Trudeau government's national carbon tax, surprise, surprise, emissions went up. So you've got emissions continuing to go up, and you still have the carbon tax costing family hundreds of dollars every year, even with the rebates. So again, here's what we are always saying. I mean, the carbon tax is all economic pain without the environmental gain.
You're right. And there's a million other things that folks could be doing. A tax is not the solution to this. A tax is not the solution to emissions. There are smart people on the big end of the arithmetic problem there that figure out a way to reduce our emissions without taxing people to death. Now, going forward, if we could wave a wand and somehow make the Prime Minister listen and actually hear us and enact what we want him to when it comes to carbon taxes, what would we say to him? What do we want Trudeau to do in this case?
Well, hey, look out the window, right? When you're flying all over the world, see what the other countries are doing. Because the other countries, there's many of them out there, they're doing the right thing. They're stepping up to the plate and they're providing their citizens with actual tax relief to ease the pain of inflation. I mean, the United Kingdom announced billions of dollars of tax relief. South Korea cut its gas taxes by 30%. You've got Germany cutting fuel taxes. The Netherlands cut fuel taxes. You have Italy, Ireland, India, you've got Peru, you've got Poland. They're cutting fuel taxes. We've seen the Alberta government cut fuel taxes. Newfoundland and Labrador, the government of Ontario. You even have state governments. You've got New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Florida. They've all announced gas tax relief. Chris, President Joe Biden is pushing for gas tax relief, even pushing the state governments to push for gas tax relief. And then, of course, you have the largest party within the European Parliament that's also pushing for gas tax relief. So what do we want Trudeau to do? We want him to follow the lead of what other world leaders are doing and provide Canadians with some much needed tax relief. And now, just one more thing. I know we've been throwing a lot of numbers out there, but today, Trudeau could immediately provide relief at the pumps by up to 30 cents per liter by scrapping the carbon tax and by cutting the GST and fuel taxes at the pump. And that would save a family more than $20 every time they fuel up their minivan.
That is a lot of money. Franco, excellent points on this. And folks, if anybody wants to look at the actual data here, I happen to know that when Franco wrote up many of these articles and pieces on this, he has hyperlinks on every single one of these countries and states and regions showing how they've reduced their gas prices.
Hi, I'm Scott Hennig, President of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. if you've got another minute, I'd like to ask you to think about the one person you know that would really enjoy listening to this podcast. Do us a favor and do them a favor and send them a quick note to let them know about it. At the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we believe there is power in numbers. That's why we've worked so hard to build an army of taxpayers who are ready to push back. And we did it because people like you shared our work with that one person that they knew would really appreciate taking part. Thanks for listening, and thanks for doing your part to make Canada a better place.